Okay. Well, welcome everybody to Reinvigorating Your Conservation Commission. My name is Jens Hilke, and I'm a conservation planning biologist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. Also helping today on the back end to ensure that everything is running smoothly is Jacob Friedman, who also works with Vermont Fish and Wildlife. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today. Okay, so a couple of housekeeping notes. So far, all of you have passed the first test and have successfully joined the Microsoft Teams meeting. Here is that toolbar that I was talking about. And so there's a video button and a mic button. If you could please keep yourself muted to cut down on the background noise, that would be great. Feel free to turn off your videos during the presentation, and we can turn those on again at the end. If you can find the chat, the button looks like this. Please write in the chat your name and what town you're from if you serve on any boards. Also, we're going to use the chat to ask questions during the webinar. So I'll be stopping every few slides. So there's the chat. I'll be stopping every few slides and you'll see a next up section and about every 10 slides. And that'll be the opportunity where Jacob will read from the questions from the chat. The presentation this morning is going to be divided up into 4 parts. We'll start with an introduction, and then we'll talk about increasing participation, strategic planning, and leveling up. Okay. So before I get too far into this, I want to tell you a little bit about where we're coming from. At the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, we believe in the conservation of fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the people of Vermont. This is a big mission that takes us in a lot of different directions. Many people are surprised to learn just how big that mission is, and that includes the conservation of all living things, from bugs to bobcats, muskies to maples, as well as the natural communities and habitats they require to thrive. This big mission also brings us into working with all sorts of Vermonters, from hunters and anglers to people who just like to look at wildlife from a distance. We work closely with towns and communities, as well as providing direct assistance to landowners looking to improve habitat on their property. And we work hard to ensure that the healthy and thriving wildlife and wild places we enjoy today will still be here for our children and grandchildren to enjoy. So I coordinate the Community Wildlife Program, serving all 267 municipal entities in Vermont and 11 regional planning commissions. So some of the free services we offer to towns and regional planning commissions include presentations, workshops, support for your planning process, support for your conservation projects, helping to connect you with other communities and learning from each other, understanding the ecological and community context in which your town sits, and of course, the creation and interpretation of resources. And so we'll be sharing a few of those resource documents with you today. This presentation is hosted in partnership with the Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions, whose mission is to empower conservation commissions and help create new ones. The AVCC really focuses on networking, helping with regional meetings. The AVCC has a listserv of about 600 people from local to professional conservationists. Every year, the group does an annual summit, really focusing on the professional development of CCs. The group has a tiny grant program with low paperwork, getting small amounts of money right into the hands of conservation commissions right when you need it. Um, and then lastly, there's a success stories archive and I really think of this as the good news of what other towns have done and where they've done it. Over the course of the presentation today, I'm going to be referring to a variety of sections from the brand new AVCC handbook. And so we'll be highlighting different chapters over the course of the morning, but I really wanted to flag that for you. Jacob will put that URL for you in the chat if that's accessible. It's also on screen, but that's a really great document that I would encourage you to look into. I'm going to answer a lot of your questions here. Okay. I don't imagine that there are many questions at this point, but I just wanted to remind you all to feel free to write questions in the chat. Jacob, are there any questions in the chat so far?
I don't see any questions in the chat so far.
Yep, thank you. Again, feel free to put questions in the chat. If you don't have that option available to you, at the very end of the presentation, you can unmute your mic and ask the question directly. Okay, so for now, next up is section 2 on increasing participation. All right. Well, over the last 15 years, I've worked with most of the conservation commissions in Vermont. And in my experience, there's a natural ebb and flow to the work of any citizen group. And this presentation is all about what to do in some of those ebbing times to help reinvigorate your conservation commission. So first of all, we're talking about groups of people, groups of volunteers. And these are relationships that need to be nurtured, and this requires work. In order to be an effective part of a group, you also have to understand a bit about yourself and where you're coming from and what you bring to that group. The more clear that everybody on the Conservation Commission can be about what they want to get out of this and what they can bring to this, the better that group is going to function. So as you think about your Conservation Commission, I also want you to be a little introspective as well. What type of person are you? What sort of role do you play in a group? When is that helpful to a group? When is that not helpful? So when groups find themselves underperforming or are experiencing a lot of tension among the members, it's a great opportunity to take a step back and assess what's going on. Now, a lot of the time, we're facing lots of work that we want to get into and not a lot of people to share that load. I'd say that tension is probably the most important issue that faces many of our conservation commissions. Now, sometimes the issues that arise are just small bad habits that we've allowed ourselves, our commissions, to get into. For example, sticking to an agenda or letting meetings stretch on beyond their allotted time. Or sometimes we get stuck in a rut in the way we've always done things, and we're not accommodating new voices, new ways of doing things. Other times the issues are more structurally significant and require us to reassess our strategic priorities and how we're moving forward. So let's dive into some of the solutions to the common problems that CCs are often experiencing. I mentioned these little issues. I'm usually of the mindset, just don't sweat the small stuff. I often talk about there being 2 types of carpenters in the world. There's the finished carpenters and the framers. And I've always been more of the framing kind of guy myself. I like to get the big bulk of the structure up quickly and get it basically lined up. But the small stuff, it's taken me many years to understand why that's important. The problem is that sometimes the small stuff can be stumbling blocks for other people's participation. And so while I don't sweat the small stuff, other people do, and it can limit their participation. So getting an agenda out the door well before a meeting helps empower others to be prepared, to get excited, to get into the meeting and to be a part of it. Running late beyond the allocated meeting time, that can happen. But if it happens on a regular event, it's going to interrupt people's lives and it's going to eventually cause you to lose members. Please understand, in my opinion, all Conservation Commission members need to help out with this small stuff so it doesn't become a big problem. We need to empower individuals across the whole commission to take on tasks. We need to divide the labor, and we need to gently hold each of us accountable. Now, the range of activities that a Conservation Commission can get into are huge. And more often than not, the number of people involved are too few to get the work done. So participation becomes the critical issue for most conservation commissions. A lot of the time, not having enough participation leads to burnout and frustration among the members who are participating. So how do we engage more people? The first step is understanding their motivations for volunteering. You know, most people want to make a difference. They want to know that their efforts won't be wasted. They want to be a part of a successful enterprise. They want to see concrete results. They want to build relationships, and they want to learn and be challenged. So think about if your Conservation Commission is meeting these different needs for your members. And if it doesn't, what do you need to do to change? Sometimes a lack of participation and an involvement can relate to the type of events that the Conservation Commission is engaged in or isn't engaged in. Conservation Commission activities need to be fun. They need to be exciting. It's not just grunt work where we put our heads down and soldier on. This needs to be fun and exciting and rewarding. And not just for the attendees, but for the commissioners that are staffing them. My first piece of advice here is that people's connection to where they live is extremely powerful. So activities that connect people to place or celebrate things about that place are an incredibly important first step for generating interest in what you're doing and maintaining the interest level of your commissioners. So celebrating place also helps people identify or confirm shared values. It's a way to reach out beyond the choir. I'm sure your town has experienced that same group of people that shows up to all the same events. We need to go beyond that, and celebration of place is a great way to do that. Another benefit of doing this is that it emphasizes what people have in common. I think all too often it's easy for discussions about change to become us and them. So by starting with sharing that love of place and seeing community values is that incredibly bonding first step that is going to get you beyond the conflict of the second step. It's going to answer that why. Why are we doing this? Because we love place. That why is more important than anything else. Let me give you an example. In 2016, the town of Bolton was working on their town plan update. Amy wasn't able to join us today, but I did want to shout out to Bolton. You know, the first meeting that they held was a pizza party, and they brought in about 50 people. First step, bring food, check. So then they did these neighborhood meetups to check in with local groups and different parts of town. So meeting people where they're at, check. Then the town put on an art contest, the Spirit of Bolton art contest, to engage townspeople in that planning process. And winners had their artwork published in the town plan. Make it fun? Check. So on screen, you see the VPR headline, from pizza party to art contest. Bolton innovates to involve residents in town planning. Bringing food, making it fun, meeting people where they're at. Incredibly important to bringing up participation. Again, not just for attendees, but for commissioners, and making attendees want to become commissioners. Here are the two winners of that art contest. At left is Boulders and Bears by Julie Longstreth, and at right is the youth entry, the winner. Bolton Streams Are Awesome. I just love that. So, you know, they made it fun and they engaged people. Community networks are starting places for getting the word out about what you're doing, for bringing up that level of participation, for bringing in new potential members to your CC. What are the civic organizations, faith groups, hunting clubs, recreation groups, historical societies around your town? What do those networks look like? Plugging into these existing networks is a great way to start getting the word out. Again, increasing participation, not just the number of attendees, but that's going to spill over into the number of people you have available to work. Not everybody's going to want to join your CC. That's a larger time commitment, but they'll help you plan individual events. And then over time, some of those volunteers are going to move up to joining the CC. So of course, there are all sorts of methods to notify people about events, web and email outreach. You know, it really depends on the town, which of these types of media work best. You know, for some, it's social media. A Front Porch Forum has been an amazing organizing tool. There's certainly old media like postal mail or newsletters, newspapers, radios, holding webinars, holding focus groups, surveys, meetings, talking to people, offering hands-on activities like mapping and charrettes. The Vermont Planning Manual is a great source of information about this idea of how to increase participation and communication. I'll be showing you that reference again in a few slides. You know, during the past 2 years, many of us have learned how to connect online using, well, yes, Teams, but also, you know, Zoom and other interactive platforms. In fact, I get blurry by the end of a workday after all of the online meetings I do. You know, some of us, I think, are anxious to get back to how things used to be. But let me just offer you this. The pandemic has shown us that these tools can increase participation. Many people who might not turn out to a public meeting might be inclined to Zoom in from the comfort of their home. And I think we have some responsibility as conservationists to lessen our carbon footprint with meetings. So moving ahead, we can take what we've learned about digital engagement, use the best of those tools moving forward as part of our communication and engagement toolkit. So I'm encouraging you not to just go back to how things used to be, but finding this new normal where we can engage in a variety of ways, online, in person, in the field, in your office, all over. I'll just point out, your commission will likely need people who can help you with this step, understanding the software and how best to use it with a group. There are different types of facilitation are needed for online meetings than in-person meetings. And so it is going to take some adjustment, but I think that's incredibly important. You know, we've been doing community values mapping for communities, and we used to do this in person, get as many people into a room as possible, crowd around base maps in small groups, share markers, you know, things that are a little bit unthinkable in the age of COVID. Well, we moved that to using a Miro whiteboard. And so what you can see on screen on the bottom left is from the town of Westminster, I believe, where we did this community values mapping. Oh, forgive me, it's Guilford, where we did community values mapping online. right, you can see how all of those results were brought into the one of the categories, the working lands category. And then at top left, you can see that we actually had 12 different small groups set up, all of the small groups operating on this whiteboard in their own little space. So incredible to be able to run that in an online environment. And from here on out, I think we're always going to offer that online environment when we do this sort of thing. We're going to try and go back in person as soon as we can, but we're also going to offer that. Now, Conservation Commission work is often done in partnership with agencies or organizations. What you see on screen is a photo of a project in Wolcott involving removing a town-owned bridge, building a wildlife shelf under Route 15. The town was involved, as was the Regional Planning Commission, the Agency of Natural Resources, the Agency of Transportation, the Nature Conservancy, and others. We work in partnership to get things done. That's the beauty of local Conservation Commission work. It's also, as far as I'm concerned, the beauty of living and working in Vermont. But as a partner, it's important for you to know what your group brings to the table. So often professional organizations that you might interact with, like the folks you see on screen, can bring expertise and resources that you can't provide. But that doesn't mean your role is unimportant. It's often the responsibility of the Conservation Commission to bring town support, either through drumming up attendance at meetings or getting in-kind match. And those contributions are critically important. So early on in the project, all the partners need to be clear on what each one is responsible for. Now, many of you probably well know that participation in town government, and especially a leadership position, can be a thankless job. Yet there are amazing volunteers across Vermont willing to step up and lead conservation commissions. First and foremost, we need to thank you for your service and not attack our town leaders simply because they're out in front and maybe we disagree with them. Next, we need to realize that there are many types of leadership and that leadership style needs to mesh with the occasion and the group. I think probably many of the CC chairs attending the webinar today are looking at this list on screen, as I do, and seeing places where we fall short, as if there's just one recipe for how to be an effective leader. There isn't. There are lots of styles of leadership, and some work better in some situations than others. So I think my advice on this front is let's be gentle with each other and realize we're a team and all of us are on the same side trying to move our town forward in whatever way we can. So it sure can feel like a lack of leadership is what's hurting your Conservation Commission, and that a change in leadership is necessary. But you know what? Willing volunteers are in short supply. And I suggest that everyone can play a role in filling that leadership void, if there is one, and building up the group. Start with building the team first, and that supposed leadership void may well be filled. So let's just think about that and that sort of approach to how we support each other and particularly support our leaders. Now, I mentioned some of these resources before. The planning manual from Agency of Commerce and Community Development has a lot of great resources on increasing participation and communication. I had mentioned the AVCC Handbook, and I'd really encourage you to look at Chapter 2, starting and building a Conservation Commission. That's another great source. Okay, so let's pause here for a break. Jacob, are there any questions in the chat that I should address now?
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet, but if anyone has any thoughts, feel free to put them in there now.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move on. Again, we're going to have, you can continue to put questions in the chat, or you can unmute your mic at the very end. So the next section is on strategic planning. Okay, so I want to take you through a 4-step process for strategic planning. I'm going to show you one example of a process that I've helped out with for a variety of conservation commissions over the years. But really, there are all sorts of ways of doing this. So strategic planning can be done in a portion of one meeting or over several meetings, depending on what you're after. I think what's most important is that the planning is helpful to the group in identifying next steps. And how much time you take on that and how deep of a dive really depends on where your group is at. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach to strategic planning. I think it really depends on where your group is at. Are you starting from scratch? What have you been doing over the years? Okay, so on the brainstorm. And here we're going to talk about really figuring out the current commitments, where everyone is coming from. Excuse me. Then we'll talk about brainstorming new ideas and organizing that list. Step 2 is going to be a capacity assessment and really figuring out, how much time and energy does your CC have, being as respectful and real as we can be. And step 3 is going to be prioritization, where we can define a set of questions that we'll prioritize our brainstorm list with. We'll have members vote on that, and then we'll tabulate those. And then that 4th step will be actually creating a work plan, where we can review the scores together as a CC. We can reassess what we want to carry forward, how much energy we want to throw at that, and then refine those activities that we're actually going to move forward with. Okay, lastly, then we'll define that time frame. Okay, so here we go. Meeting 1. So that brainstorm can be done in that first meeting, in one meeting, and then that work plan reassessing, after the vote has happened, tabulating, looking at those priorities together and moving forward can be done in a second meeting, with steps 2 and 3 really happening in between those 2 meetings. Okay, that first step in brainstorm, where is everyone coming from? It's important that every member of the commission understands where other folks are coming from. And early on in this process, and as new members join in, it's important that we share personal goals and expectations of Conservation Commission work, and that we get to know each other a little bit. This shared understanding is important for a team to function effectively. I think that next step is figuring out what the existing commitments are. What is the Conservation Commission already doing on an annual basis? What activities is it committed to over the course of a year? Perhaps it's regularly scheduled events like Green Up Day, or in Bradford they have a race to the top that they do every year. It's ongoing work, like in Charlotte they do development review using a significant wildlife habitat map. So what are the existing commitments? We want to get those out on the table first. Then your group is going to want to do a big brainstorm for ideas above and beyond what they're already doing. And now remember that during a brainstorm, you never want to put sideboards on it, and you don't want to discuss the ideas during the brainstorm. So you don't want one member to say, hey, what about this? It's a crazy idea. And somebody else say, oh, that's never going to work. No, during a brainstorm, there's no sideboards, there's no feedback. It's just, hey, let's get this idea out on the table. So you want to get all those ideas out on the table. Here's a list, actually from the Montpelier Conservation Commission, that I helped work with. So these were new ideas for Conservation Commission action above and beyond what they were already doing. So that brainstorm usually happens at that first meeting. And then in between that first meeting and their second meeting, the facilitator and the chair often get together to help organize that brainstorm list, putting the ideas in buckets. Now, using the town plan goals can be a very helpful organizational framework. Sometimes the brainstorm list just falls out in terms of other buckets like energy or public information, logical groupings. Using the CC's mission and vision statement can be important here. But again, you want to organize that brainstorm list so ideas that show up in the same bucket show up together. And again, that's often done in between two meetings after that brainstorm that was done in the public session. Another step here is a capacity assessment. And that's figuring out how much time people actually have to work on it, on Conservation Commission issues. Now, it needs to be stressed that there's no judgment here. Some of us are going to have a lot more time to dedicate to these efforts than others. And so we want to get at what's real, and we don't want to pass judgment. They're going to be retired members, members of the commission who are retired from their day jobs that may have a lot more time to volunteer. There also might be Conservation Commission members with young families that have a lot less time. Again, we want our commissions to be open and welcoming to a whole broad range of people, and that's going to mean they have different time to bring to Conservation Commission work. So I often built into this Google spreadsheet that I'm building with you now, I often build in one step of a capacity assessment where everyone can say, okay, well, how many hours a month do you actually spend on CC issues? And if we multiply that over a year, how many hours is that? And so what's a ballpark for the total capacity in terms of the amount of work, the amount of hours that our CC has over a year? That can be really useful check. Because the brainstorming, you're gonna come up with more work than you can possibly do in a lifetime. Here's one way of bringing that down to reality. Like, let's be clear about how much time we have. So now I'm talking about organizing. You have the brainstorm list as one list. Then you have this capacity assessment. Now we're going to develop questions for prioritization. And this is to prepare the group for the voting process, how you can vote on what's most important in your brainstorm list. And this is going to help focus your group on the prioritization process. Here in this example, the questions we used, does the project help us strengthen relationships and involve residents? Does the project help us in our role of advising the Planning Commission, Select Board on others on natural resource issues? Does the project help carry out the goals of the town plan? Does the project help us inventory, identify, and prioritize natural resources? That came right out of their mission statement. What is your level of interest in being personally involved with this project? What level of experience or expertise could you bring to carry out this project? How feasible is it for the CC as a group or with partners to actually get this done? Is this issue, project, idea already being effectively addressed by one or more other groups in town? Okay, overall, how big of a priority should this list be for the Conservation Commission to engage in the next 5 years? So those are 9 questions that one group came up with as a way of prioritizing their brainstorm list. All right, let me show you. I'm an Excel geek. I'm sorry. Let me show you how this looked on Google Docs. Okay, so here's an example of the spreadsheet that I used. At left are the brainstormed ideas. in their buckets. They're organized, right? And then at the top, there's question number 1, and that's in gray. And then there are different columns for each Conservation Commission to vote on. Then there's question 2, again, with columns for each Conservation Commissioner to vote on. So when I first developed this, obviously there weren't scores in the middle, and I'm sorry I didn't show you a screenshot of the blank blank spreadsheet. But that's the sort of thing we set up on a Google Doc, where we organize the Brainstorm list on column, the first column, and then we put the questions along the top and made columns for each commissioner for each question to assess every row, right? And one row is a project idea, and so you go all the way across through all 9 questions, scoring it, and each Conservation Commission member did that. This was done on Google Docs. So all of that voting happened in between that first meeting, the Brainstorm, and that second meeting, the where we prioritized the list. So then we went, and when we used the Google Doc in this case, and we had everybody voting. We had trained members in how to use the spreadsheet. We were clear on, what does a 1 mean? What does a 5 mean? And we ensured that all members participated. We were frequently checking the Google Doc, who'd filled out their columns. Before the meeting, several days before the meeting, we sent out a reminder, hey, fill out your votes. 2 days before the meeting, oh, I noticed there's one more person who hasn't voted yet. Please get that done. And then by the time that second meeting came around, we had votes from every single commissioner. Now, the tabulation happened automatically, but I didn't show that to the commissioners. But just before the second meeting, you can tabulate all those scores. So average them across each row for each of the 9 questions. And then, make those scores visible to everyone before the meeting. Okay, so in the actual second meeting of this strategic planning process, we went through the list. And again, you see the brainstormed list at left. And then that first column is the score that it got. And so then in the meeting, we reviewed each idea. We looked at the score it got, and then we gave it another score. So it was an opportunity to reassess. So questions that have like a very wide range of responses. One person gave that idea 1, another person gave that idea 5. We were able to talk about it a bit, and then together we put another score down of how important is it to carry this thing forward. And that's what you're seeing in the yellow column in the middle. So that was, live in person together in that second meeting, reviewing the tabulated scores from online, and then together coming up with a score of what do we want to carry forward. And then that far column at right is, just a quick assessment. How big of a lift is this thing going to be? What's the level of effort? How much of an effort do we want to put at this? We could throw all our heart and soul at it, or we could take it slow. And so this is just saying, well, let's throw our heart and soul at these, the number 5s, and let's not push as hard at some of the lower ones. So then, again, we're refining those activities, and this often happens after that second meeting of just adding a little bit more detail. What are the costs? What are potential partners for each of the ideas that we put in yellow that we want to move forward? And then we want to add a timeline to this. So for each idea with, how much energy we want to throw at it, we can begin to mark specific months when we're going to handle that item. And so this is a way where you can spread out all of those ideas over a 5-year work plan or a 2-year work plan or whatever it might be. And so you can actually schedule things in. Well, we want to handle this in these months, and we want to handle that in those months. So forgive me if this was a little tedious, but I wanted to empower you to show you how you can do strategic planning. I am certainly happy to offer up this spreadsheet to anyone that wants it. I'm also happy to facilitate strategic planning processes, but I just wanted you to be aware of what that process could look like and what you could use, what you could do. So, resources on this one, certainly the Community Wildlife Program, my program, is available for this type of work, the tech assistance, or also just providing our prioritization and spreadsheet. I mentioned the AVCC handbook, and chapter 4 has there's a whole chapter on setting priorities and achieving goals. So those are really great resources for thinking about moving that strategic planning piece forward. Okay, Jacob, anything in the chat from that section?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat right now.
Okay. Sorry, folks, if you're having a hard time using that chat, I apologize. Again, different people experience Teams differently depending on how they log in, but we will have some time at the end to get to questions. Okay, let's handle this last section and outreach planning. So I want to dive into developing an outreach plan. Now, this could be for all of your Conservation Commission messages over a year or a multi-year period, or it could be for a particular project and messages specific to that project. So, for example, a Conservation Commission might have a set of general messages, like what you see at right. The Conservation Commission is here to support the town's interest in conservation and natural resources. We work on inventory of natural resources. We receive gifts of land for conservation. We assist the Planning Commission on natural resource issues, and we promote public understanding of local natural resources. The integration of our ecology and natural resources is key to maintaining our rural character and planning for development in the most appropriate places. So that's an example of sort of those big picture messages that a CC might want to put out about its work, its reason for being, its connection to the people. But messages that we're talking about could be really specific to a town forest. Like, okay, there's a new town forest proposal coming in. And we want to set up messages that, this won't raise your taxes. This is important for, I'm just making this stuff up off the top of my head. But, messages that are really specific to that town forest project. Either way, I think you want to follow the list at left. And so first, you want to list each of the audiences you're trying to reach. It could be like for the messages I'm showing it right. It could be the Planning Commission and other town boards. It could be large lot landowners in town or the business community. Those are just a few examples of maybe important audiences that you might want to hit with those messages. Then you want to tailor your list of messages for each audience. And it would be good to identify a lead message and then other messages if you have time. And I think you want to tweak those messages for each audience. For example, if you're trying to reach the business community, you might want to zero in on that last bullet. Integration of our ecology and natural resources is key to maintaining our rural character and planning for development. And maybe you want to tweak that a little bit to really reach the business community and say something like, well, if we're going to have a healthy economy, we're going to need a healthy ecology to base that on. And so our interests really are leading towards your business interests. I'm just showing you how you take that main message and you tweak it for each of the audiences. I'm not talking about being dishonest, but I'm talking about speaking specifically to their interests and how your interests and their interests overlap. So you're going to want to tweak those messages. Then you're going to want to figure out, well, how exactly are we going to reach that audience? And how often are we going to reach that audience? So I would make a huge matrix. I've already shown you my Excel nerdliness. I apologize. But I would really use that sort of massive spreadsheet. and get those main messages and those specific messages and come up with a plan. Like, okay, how often, who are we going to reach, at what time, and how are we going to do that? Now, the reason to think about communication and participation is because it's going to help you connect with your community. Real participation is different than the public process that's typically required. Right? Public hearings, newspaper notices and hearings. How many of us actually read that section of the paper? At the end of the day, giving notice isn't participation. It's informing someone of something that's happening. But we want participation. And so what can be done instead is to provide multiple and different opportunities to participate meaningfully in the process. And we want to set those opportunities up early and often. It takes work to think about this outreach plan and how we connect with people. But that discipline early on is really going to pay off throughout the process. Again, there's some great resources here. The AVCC Handbook has a whole chapter on communication and engagement, the ACCD Planning Manual, and also VNRC's Community Strategies. Okay, so lastly, I want to talk about land use planning. And this is, I'm in the section on leveling up, right? How do we take our Conservation Commission's work to the next level? Part of reinvigorating our Conservation Commission can be leveling up, giving our members more of a challenge, taking it to the next level. And land use planning is a way of doing that. And I'd say sprawl is really one of our greatest threats to the natural resources that we are responsible for maintaining. That auto-dependent dispersed development outside of compact urban and village centers. That in so many ways is the problem. And that through good land use planning, we can address that sprawl. We can concentrate development in places we want it and avoid it in places we don't. So, you know, planning can help a community make decisions about a whole range of topics, like what to spend limited town funds on, how to keep a place healthy, safe, and appealing. Really, town plans are comprehensive in order to figure out the balance that makes for a strong community. And through the planning process, a town can also make decisions about how to balance private property rights with the commons. I think striking this balance is the work of the Planning Commission, but also it shows up in the tone of the Conservation Commission. We need to understand that town planning is a balancing act, and natural resources is one piece of that balancing act, but we really are looking at all sorts of conflicting values. And so thinking about our work as representing the natural resources, but bringing it into this balancing act is really important. We think about town planning as a way of reinvigorating our Conservation Commission. A lot of it is going to come down to that town plan and maps like this. You know, this is the natural resources map for the town of Newfane. And a lot of good resources do show up on this map, but there are also opportunities to change things. Many conservation commissions work on the natural resource chapter of the town plan, and that can be really helpful in reinvigorating your CC because it's meaningful. It's getting into the document that is really at the heart of the future of the town. But I encourage you not to let your conservation work end at just the natural resource chapter. The proposed land use or future land use section of that town plan can be critically important. That's where the actual vision for what the future is going to look like gets expressed. Not in those natural resource maps, but in this proposed or future land use map. And here in the Newfane example, there's actually a pretty big distinction in terms of what shows up at that resource level versus what the proposal for the future looks like. And so I'm just encouraging you, as you're thinking about reinvigorating your CC, you're thinking about diving into the town plan, I'm encouraging you to not be segmented, not have your input end at the natural resource chapter, but really have it go throughout that town plan and that planning process. We have talked about a variety of ways of increasing conservation capacity in your town. And so as we think about reinvigorating our conservation commissions, I just wanted to point you to some of these other webinars that we've done on conducting a natural resource inventory and starting a conservation fund. Again, as ways of leveling up, as ways of taking your conservation work to that next level. The more meaningful, important, fun, and challenging work that your CC has to get into, as long as there's adequate participation, the more reinvigorated the members are going to feel. Okay. Also this spring, we have other webinars coming up. There's one on climate action planning with the Agency of Natural Resources Climate Action Team. I'm offering some BioFinder drop-in help sessions that will be pretty informal, and it'll be an opportunity where you have very specific questions on using BioFinder. I can help you with those mechanics. And we're going to be doing another webinar on reviewing your town plan and regulations and looking at this 10-year review of all the town plans in Vermont that we've done. All right, just wrapping up here, I'll remind everybody that conservation is overwhelmingly paid for by hunters and anglers in the state of Vermont. And if you're interested in supporting conservation work, you can purchase a habitat stamp or contribute to the Non-Game Wildlife Fund on your tax forms. The habitat stamp isn't a U.S. Postal Service stamp. It's more like a sticker that you can put on your window or car bumper to show that you support wildlife. But it does support conservation and management of fish and wildlife habitat, as well as providing public access for wildlife-based recreation. And as tax time is coming around, you can make a donation to the Non-Game Wildlife Fund by using the checkbox on your state tax return. Okay, so with that, again, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this was informative and helpful to you. Again, I continue to be here to help your Conservation Commission. My services are free to you, and I love working with CCs across Vermont. It's why I've been at it so long, is because that working at this local level is reinvigorating for me as a professional, and I hope it's helpful to you all. So please don't hesitate to contact me. All right. So we have a few minutes left. Are there any questions in the chat at this time, Jacob?
Yeah, we've got a few questions in the chat that I can share now. The first one is, what do you do when there is a commission member who has a passion for something such as stream monitoring that doesn't directly fit with the final agreed upon priorities of the commission?
I think that's a great question. And, you may have noticed in the strategic planning process, there were a couple questions that got at that individual excitement for things. And that individual's passion for a topic can lead them to work a lot more on something than they might otherwise. But what do you do when that doesn't quite fit? Well, is there a way you can work that into your strategic plan, but also allocate very specific times to it? So you can make room for it, for that person to pursue it, but not have it take over the whole work of the commission. And if you hear it start to take over, you can say, well, Bob, let me just remind you that we're going to work on this for those 3 months in that month, in that year. And so that using the strategic plan as a way of sharing expectations on that level. So that's just one first thought. It very much depends how out of scope the individual's interests are with where the rest of the CC is. But, to whatever extent you can channel that individual's energy and make it as helpful to the commission, I think that's a good way forward.
Another question we have in the chat is, how can you insert the Conservation Commission into the town planning process if it hasn't been sought out or perhaps even welcomed?
That's a great question. And, you know, our town boards are human endeavors. And so there needs to be a basis of trust. And the relationship of trust between the Planning Commission and the Conservation Commission is probably the most important relationship for a CC as it thinks about town planning. So often there's a perception of the Conservation Commission as, you know, the environmental yahoos that they don't have the town's interest at heart. They're trying to, well, go save the bears or whatever. And so doing activities that show that your commission is rooted in the town's priorities and constantly referring to aspects of the town plan where your work is highlighted can be ways of showing that you are in fact working on the people's business. That can help build that trust with the Planning Commission. And so over time, I think you can do that. Specifically, I would say you would want to assign a CC member to attend all of the Planning Commission members, all of the Planning Commission meetings during that town plan rewrite. Again, to favor that communication between the two groups and help build up that trust. And then, you know, you could also just go to the CC chair and say, hey, would it be okay if we were to take to offer up a first draft of the natural resource chapter for your review? That sort of thing. Anyway, next question, please, Jacob.
Yeah, sort of building on that same topic, how can the Conservation Commission get recognition by the Select Board and Planning Commission as a resource?
I think your actions will speak louder than your words. And just by hosting events that are fun and well attended, you will get a reputation as a player in town government, that your commission has some gravitas. So I really think just that history of activities is important. You know, particularly I think community values mapping can be a way of showing that you have the town's interests at heart, and that can be a way of increasing your the extent to which the Planning Commission or the Select Board might want to reference your work.
Great. Another question more on the technical side is, how do we access these webinars, the webinars that we just showed in the previous slide, and will this webinar be available to be watched again?
Yes, we are recording this webinar, and all of the recordings go on the trainings page that you may have used to register for this. Not the Eventbrite, but the A&R trainings page. And so if you just if you Google the Community Wildlife Program trainings, you'll get to our trainings page. It's also what I post on the AVCC website. And so all of our previous recordings are placed there. That's going to take us a few weeks to get it up there. Happy to share these, share a PDF of this slideshow with you in the near term. And Jacob, I'm just seeing that it's 12:01. I am happy to stick around for another couple of questions, but you all should feel free to sign off. And I hope to see you next time. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Should we just take one more question, Jacob?
Sure. The last one in here is there a comprehensive list of technical expertise contacts and organizations that can help facilitate improvements that can be shared with conservation commissions?
You know, in the back of the Green Book, Conserving Vermont's Natural Heritage is our first effort at compiling that landscape of technical assistance. But it's pretty out of date, and it's actually very difficult to compile that list of all those technical contacts and organizations, because it's something of a constantly shifting human landscape. So if you have particular questions of additional contacts that you'd like, please just email me, and I'm happy to provide those.
Great.
All right.
Oh, sorry. The last question right here was, will you be sending info on the climate action planning webinar and BioFinder?
Sure. I'll send out a reminder to the AVCC list and the VPA list about that webinar. You can also find it on Eventbrite. The next version, the next session is scheduled for March 10th, I believe. And yeah, I'm happy to send that out. Great. Well, with that, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And Jacob, thank you for helping. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great.
Thank you very